Because he was like looking at GitHub's reference, then he was looking at the Git reference, and I was like, okay, they're kind of similar, but really what you need to do is like merge, like, branch, you need to catch up like with conflicts, and I was like, this goes over all of that, don't look at anything else. It was great. And it's like a white and black page, so you can't get distracted. I was like, yeah, just look at this, like this is perfect. I was like, oh man, that's great. Yeah, I was like,
that says we're streaming.
Server log.
Yeah.
It's like 90% AI scraping.
Oh,
maybe
yeah,
it made its own
exactly.
different stream.
Is anybody real?
No, I've only been able to like share it with a couple people because like most of the people I work with are developers who know Git, but like I had to get CUCC set up with their first like GitHub repository, their first organization, and they needed like their first reference, and so I was like, oh, Beach just wrote a document, so shot that over to them, and that's what they've been using to like stay with it. So yeah. No, I'm just a contractor. They needed help with a service before the grant money got cut by the administration, so they sent the money over to me, and they're like, okay, do the work before it all disappears. And so I was like, great. I was like, awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, we're good.
This must just be in a different thing.
I wanted to let you know because I can tell you take a lot of time to put those together, and they are very worthwhile.
I think so.
Yeah.
All right,
Great
let's just
reference.
switch it back to the other one, and then let's get Aidan set up.
Okay.
All right.
Am I set up yet?
Yeah, we're all good. He's got the live stream.
Okay.
You're all set up. Make sure you're forward.
All right, let's get started. Second time.
I'll give people like a second to see.
Yeah.
Do you keep your keys on your boots?
I have no pockets.
Okay, that's fair. That's really good.
So today, yes, they stay on my boots.
When you don't have pockets, you could use keys on your boots. Yeah.
No, just herd people over. Come on.
Make noise.
All right, let's get started, everybody. So, all right.
He's right in my ear. Can you
I'm
not?
just gonna get Aidan started. All right. So anyway, so Aidan's gonna give an awesome talk, and yeah, take it away.
Okay.
Right on, Aidan.
Sweet. Cool. Everyone's seems settled. So, hi, I'm Aidan. Like Nathan mentioned, I'm going to be giving a talk tonight, and I am super humbled to be here in front of a bunch of tech enthusiasts, developers, and just anyone else who cares to come watch me ramble in front of them for 40 minutes. So, huge shout out to the organizers for getting this put together and giving me the opportunity to come speak. I just have my GitHub up here. I'm farming followers, so I'd like to see that count go up a little more before the end of the night, but otherwise I will jump into the presentation here. So if you didn't see the posts on Meetup, on the Discord, get out from the rock you live under, but tonight we're going to be talking about background processing and isolation, subtext, a lesson in sharing with TypeScript, and so we'll jump right into this. Perfect. So a little about myself and why I wanted to give this talk. I started my development career at a company called G5, which I'm sure 90% of you have probably heard about here in town. It was purchased by RealPage a little while ago and then nuked out of orbit by the government. And so I ended up leaving and becoming a contractor. But during my time as a contractor, I've worked with startups and working on the integrations team at G5. I'm sure you can imagine just based off that keyword. I do a lot of data integrations. So this means working with vendor data CRMs or any kind of data warehouse, pulling down data, transforming it, and loading it into a standardized format that can work for internal teams, whether that's front-end facing applications that need to pull down this data, if that's Airflow processes that run with data extraction teams. I work with data a lot, and so the startups that I've helped launch, and one that just actually went live on Monday, is all very data oriented. And to be quite honest, I really love this because I love building stuff. When you're processing data, it means you're working with the front end, you're displaying it to the user, you're pulling it down from a place, you're doing business logic on the transformations, you're working across the stack to build something really cool. And so I'm really excited to give this talk because it's just something that I'm passionate about and that I love. And so the reason I like to give this talk is because I see a lot of people going to build applications, right? We have this, I guess, advent of AI, if you will, and whether or not you're scared of that or you love it, that's up to you. But when we build services, they're never really self-contained, right? We all want to have our data on platform to access it as fast as we can, but we often have to maintain parity with external services. Think Stripe for invoices, think GitHub for repositories. If you're working with an external application, you're not really keeping your data on platform. And usually we have to do this on some kind of schedule or some kind of unique, I guess, cron, and that's oftentimes because we have to run nightly. We have to do this when the user isn't aware, right? We want to do this so that when they log back in the morning, all this stuff is pretty, they see their invoices, they know their GitHub repository is connected, and we need to show the user when this takes place. So if they do log in, we need to have some kind of live status, right? Whenever you connect something, you want to see if it's queued, if it's processed, if it's failed, or if it's succeeded, right? And so we're going to be talking about data processing and how to make sure the user knows when it's running and what's going on in the background. And so a couple examples of this that I just took is one from Vercel. This would be deployments that run. So for my personal portfolio, we can see every time I commit to the repository, it kicks off a new build. This has a queued status. It shows, hey, this is live. And this is very critical, right? Because if I couldn't see this, then I would be kicking off deploys all the time and wondering, when is my service going to be live? Or if you've worked with a product team that's asking you, or you're answerable to them and saying, hey, when is our service live? We need to have some kind of status. And this is the same for GitHub Actions, for example. If you run an action or you commit to your repository, there's going to be something that tells you, hey, this is running. And while it seems a little silly, this feature right here is very hard to implement, right? We have to start the background process, we have to relay it back to the user, we have to send status updates, and this can be a difficult process for a lot of people, and I'll jump into it in a little bit, but this is very important. And then that second part is rate limits, right? So on that first slide, we took a look at that. Rate limits will drive your business, and one of my favorite rate limits that I've worked with so far is from an organization called Energy Star. I'm sure you've heard of them. They're on your toilet, they're on your light bulb. Energy Star certifies just about everything. And as a contractor, I've started up a lot of sustainability companies, and we have to pull down data, maintain parity with them, whether we're working with buildings or utility data. And so if we look at their rate limit, the text is a little small here, but for their development environment, we only get 10 requests a second. And then in their live environment, we get 100 requests a second, Monday through Friday. Off hours, we get 200 requests a second, and then on the weekends, of course, it's 200 requests a second. And they don't have a lot of money, so they keep these rate limits really low, and then on the off hours, we can do more processing. And so when I've had to work with them, this has been a very difficult thing, and so this is kind of where I started to realize, okay, maybe background processing is a lot more difficult and something that we need to take a lot more seriously, because when we're maintaining parity with users' data and what's in a service, this becomes a huge driving factor of your business. When I've seen AI founders, if you will, go to scale their application after they fix the issue with secrets getting leaked into their markup, they hit this eventual wall where the services that they're working with are getting rate limited. And we have to be able to do something about that. And so we have to background process, right? We need to load jobs into a queue. We need to handle these jobs under the rate limit threshold. So we need to be able to define an interval and say this is how many jobs we're going to handle in this many seconds, this many minutes, this many hours. This needs to be cheap and it needs to be scalable, right? If we look at the overlapping of services, cheap and scalable don't usually line up, but I'll show you guys here in a little bit just how I've done it in the past. And then the user has to know what's going on, right? So in our example with Vercel, in our example with GitHub, the user has to be aware, hey, this sync is going on, or else they're going to be reaching out to you and saying, hey, why isn't my data processing? Or it did process, but I have no idea what's happened. And then the most important part of this usually is our auth-based resource scoping, right? So I want users to be able to come in and sync data, but I only want certain users to be able to see if those syncs are running. I only want certain users to be able to run those syncs, and I might want to block a user from seeing them entirely, right? So this is pretty important to make sure that only developers can connect a repository, only product people can see when that repository is connected or when it's synced up. So this becomes a big dependency of our application. Before I go much further, any Rails or PHP developers here? I know this is Bend, a lot of companies launch on Rails. Yeah, so a few Rails developers. When I give this talk, I usually see this a lot, is Rails developers looking at TypeScript developers and going, look what they have to do to mimic what we can do, right? So later in this talk, I'm going to be showing a bit of overhead that we have to go through to set up a TypeScript application to do what Rails and Laravel have been able to do for years, right? And so I would implore you not to look down on TypeScript developers. And the reason being is because if you look, and these numbers are very small, JavaScript and TypeScript consistently stay high up, and you Ruby developers, you're down there, number 16, eat it. So, and the reason we're really moving into TypeScript and, Java, C, and a bunch of other strongly typed languages are becoming prevalent is because in the world of AI, types keep us safe, right? This is really important. And so this is why I focused on TypeScript for this talk, is because types protect us from hallucinated code, right? If you define an interface, AI writes a service, it tries to pull a value that isn't defined, then you can catch that before you actually run the application. And I hear a lot of people go, oh, I'll catch that in runtime. Well, the time it takes to actually run the service, test it, go back to it, that's time that you're answerable to your workplace, right? So if we can catch those issues before runtime, that's huge. And then second, remote and isolated teams, being able to share types across applications, that's pretty downright fantastic if you ask me, because I know what one team has changed as long as I stay up to date with their module. And then most frameworks nowadays that are coming out, minus anything DHH has produced, is TypeScript preferable, right? So with the modern infrastructure, TypeScript used to be something that we would have to set up. You'd have to define a TS config. You'd have to set up your Express application to handle TypeScript. Depending on your modules, you'd have to set up a different TypeScript config. And this was a problem. But nowadays, it's very quick to get started. And we'll take a look at some of those frameworks here in a minute. But Next, Nest, and Nuxt, these modern frameworks that are coming out, and I'll start with an N, all support TypeScript out of the box. So there's no config, there's no more setup. Your boss isn't asking, hey, why is our application not running? And you're going, man, there's a bunch of red lines in my editor because TypeScript isn't working. So this is really nice. But the problem is that modern TS frameworks aren't perfect, right? So we have this kind of architecture that we've been shifting towards called serverless. And a while ago, there was a really good talk about the problems with serverless here at the Deschutes Tech Guild. I would highly recommend going to the DTG website and checking it out. They did a really good job talking about the pitfalls. So when we talk about serverless, right, we define a function that gets invoked. And this is kind of problematic because when you have a function that has to do everything when invoked and return something to the user, we have this kind of push to slam everything into that one function. And for any of you developers out there, if you saw a function that was bootstrapping your application, handling all business logic, and then returning a value, you would look at it and go, okay, we need to split that out. And so there's also this kind of problem of hidden build steps and processes that we don't really know what's going on because they all have their kind of unique build steps. And so we're going to be talking about background processing, but for Nest, Nuxt, and Next.js, what we have to do is we have to bootstrap our workers to the server because whenever they start up, this function needs to run everything, right? The user hits the function starts up, it does what it needs to do, it starts the worker, and then it closes. And so we need to work around that a little bit. And so I'm not going to be talking about serverless. We need to have persisted servers. And so moving forward from this, what I saw, and I blurred out the user's name, is that background processing when it comes to Nuxt or these modern frameworks is something that people are still having a hard time understanding. And I don't blame this developer for what they did, right? So they came to the Nuxt Discord and they said, hey guys, I want to run background tasks in my Nuxt 3 application. These need to be long-running processes and they need to see real-time updates on the front end. And that's great, and that's exactly what I was talking about tonight when I saw this, and so I put it into my slide. But the AI chatbot that responded said, oh, hey, run your background processes in memory. And if anyone here is looking at that, that's a big problem because if your application goes down, all your background processes stop, right? So if I'm running it in my endpoint while the server is running, let's say my Kubernetes pod scales down and we scale up a new pod. Let's say I run a new deployment, something like that. I need to make sure that my background processes are running because oftentimes these are the most critical features of my application. They maintain parity with services that are business critical for users to see live reflections of their data of. So with my Energy Star example, if my application goes down and Energy Star is now missing utility data for a customer, they can't get certified by Energy Star for that month. They have to wait another month or something to come up in the cycle. So this is really important that we make sure that these run. And so I give this example because I feel like a lot of developers, when they hear me say, oh, just run your background services in a dedicated processor, they go, oh yeah, no brainer. But with the advent of AI code and AI assistance, it's not really this developer's fault. They came here, said, hey, I'm using this framework. What are the best tools? What do I need to do? And the bot that was added to that framework's Discord server responded with something that works, but is it a best practice? No. And so I don't blame these developers. They are just getting hit with something that we never really had to deal with when we were learning to code. And so when we look at the modern TS framework, right, when we talk about a serverless function, if you're a developer, you create functions that handle specific logic. And this is really important, right? When we go back to our bootstrapping the application example, if you saw a function that had to bootstrap the entire application, start workers, handle a process, do everything, then close, you'd go, hey, we need to split that out, dry out that code a little bit. And so we need to be applying our coding best practices to our infrastructure. And I share this article down here. It's from the year 2000, but still pretty prevalent. And it's one of the things you should never do, part 1. And what this article covers is that rewrites will kill your business. The article talks about Netscape, and Netscape's not around. And so this article covers, the single worst strategic mistake that a software company can make, and that's rewriting the code. So if I build my business to handle all of its processing in application, if I build my business to run on serverless, and yeah, it gets us to MVP. ChatGPT got me through it. I'm now an AI founder. My software is running. Users are using it. But hey, now I'm butting up against the rate limits of Energy Star. If I have to go to my boss and say, yeah, we hit the MVP in 2 months, 3 months ahead of schedule, but hey, we need to rewrite the entire thing and shift architecture, I'm probably going to get let go. That is not a good thing. So when we talk about architecture, when we talk about services, we want to understand that yes, our applications are applications, but they are just code services, and we need to split these out and start handling them better. And so if my slide moves here, so then I'm going to be talking about Nuxt and Nitro and UnJS frameworks. And so if you're asking yourself, well, Aidan, why Nuxt? It sounds like Rails is better. It sounds like PHP is better. I've known this for 30 years. Why are you talking about TypeScript? Well, the UnJS team basically wrote these frameworks and new tools to be very cohesive within this ecosystem. Nuxt supports modules, layers, and configs that can be shared across applications. So to you Rails developers who have modules that share controllers, that share routes, that share business logic, this is a different language and framework, but it handles all of those same things. And we don't see that anywhere else in the ecosystem. If you look at Next, if you look at Nest.js, yes, we can share TypeScript services, but I can't share routes. I can't share pages. And so Nuxt supports this. And then to my last point, Vue, right? Facebook hasn't given up ownership of the React framework. It is still rolled up under the Facebook organization. And as a doomsday prepper myself, Facebook isn't doing so hot. So if they ever go down, do I want a business that I've built to be part of this shattered ecosystem where everyone's trying to, build a new standard as soon as Facebook goes? So I say Vue with a smiley face because I can kind of always trust it to be there for me. But the UnJS ecosystem is more than Nuxt or its server frameworks. They rebuilt everything. So if you're using changelog generators within your applications or your modules, that's UnJS right now. They rebuilt cookie services. They rebuilt bundlers. They work with Vite. They rebuilt their own WebSocket services to be faster than anything that we had out in the ecosystem right now. I know a lot of you have probably worked with Express or Nuxt 2 or older JavaScript applications where the boot time just to get into the application itself is minutes. And I work with that personally. And so being able to jump into this ecosystem and have everything run at a snap of a finger is really nice. And so I would implore anyone who's interested in this, go check out the UnJS ecosystem, go browse around. There's a ton of different packages. Even if you're not building an application, if you're building a CLI, they have a tool for that. It's a really great resource to go check out before you build anything. And so we're going to be talking about Nuxt, but we're also going to be talking about Nitro. And what's important to understand is that Nuxt is an amalgamation of a few different tools, right? So UnJS said, hey, we want to ditch Express, we want to ditch Hono, we want to ditch all these other HTTP frameworks, and they built something called H3, which is short for HTTP. Take for that what you will, I don't believe it. But it is a lightweight and modern HTTP server that can run with Dino, that can run with Bun, that can run with NPM, and it can deploy anywhere, and it is type safe. So taking that, they then built Nitro on top of it, which supports plugins to bootstrap things to the server. We get WebSockets, we get static handling, and we get this Nitro config that we'll talk about. Nuxt is built off of Nitro, and it supports view pages, it supports layers, it supports modules, and a Nitro config is a valid Nuxt config, and this is really important. So if I'm a contractor and I'm going to a client and I need to build them a microservice architecture of 3 different applications, I need to be able to share configs between them. I need to have a very cohesive ecosystem within my application structure, so I'm not wasting time spinning up one app and then another app and they don't share any configs, right? And when we talk about cohesive, I mean from my iPhone controlling my laptop down there, this gives us this same kind of framework to work with, and it can be very powerful, and I'll talk about that once we jump into code. But before I do, I want to talk a little bit about how I see background processing. And so I put this little architecture slide together because I'm going to jump into code here in a second, but I wanted to talk about what I actually developed before I came in. And so when we talk about background processing, right, and a dedicated resource, I saw that a Nitro server could be used for background processing, right? I can deploy a Nitro server. All it handles is just web requests. It doesn't need to have any pages. And it can handle web requests to create jobs and send job statuses over HTTP. That's great. And then my Nuxt app can handle the user-facing stuff to send status updates via WebSockets. It allows requests to go through, go to the Nitro service to pull down job states. And so this can act as my authentication. It can act as my barrier. If you're using Auth0 or something else, you'd have your M2M auth right here. And then I created a node module which gives us our types and entities. So if you're using an ORM, you might use models. Type ORM uses entities in this case. And then for my front end, it is only aware of types, right? So I wanted a node module that could share my types and entities with the back end, and then my front end shouldn't even be aware of a database, right? I don't want it to be aware of any of the processing that's going on in the back end here. I just need the types to make sure that my Nuxt app stays up to date with my Nitro server. And so this can be a very great way to move forward because I want a front end that is agnostic to anything that the Nitro server is doing. I don't care about its migrations. I don't care about its entities. I just care to make sure I have the types to support the responses that it's going to give me. And so what we'll jump into next is, I guess, code. There we go. So let me get this pulled up. And I'm going to walk around with my laptop now. So when I put this together, I created, of course, 3 applications. So we start with our Nitro processor. And if you haven't seen anything from the UnJS team, this might look a little bit weird, but what we get is this very wonderful developer experience. And if we take a look at an API route, so let's say here, I want to create a job. In Nitro, all I have to do is define an event handler that responds to an HTTP event. I just create a job and give it a job state and say it's queued. And then I can return this job state when an app hits my endpoint. That looks very simple, right? So when I hear Rails developers come up to me and they go, oh, my controller, it's super restful, it's super easy to put together. That's 6 lines of code, right? You know, I don't have authentication, I don't have rate limiting here. That would be handled in your middleware, but that's a working route, right? And so here, this Nitro processor, it defines 2 routes. One, a create post request, and then second, we need to be able to get the job states, right? So if my front end goes down, I don't want the user to only rely on the job states that come back from the application. I want to make sure that if the front end goes down and it comes back up, a user can request these job states again to see what's been processed, what's happened while the app's been down.
Hey, can you zoom for us really quick? Can you control Command plus that?
Does that actually?
Yeah, just go super big.
Okay, cool.
Sorry.
Nope, all good. For me, it's easy to read. If you guys can't read it, then let me know.
Go super uncomfortably big.
There we go.
There we go.
No.
Keep going. Keep going.
Ouch. Enhance.
There we go. Is that good? Perfect.
People in the back?
Yep, we good? Sweet. So then, once we come down, of course, we had to talk about workers. We have to talk about queues. So in this Nitro app, I defined some queues. So if you haven't seen BullMQ, we just create a queue. We give it a Redis connection to look for jobs and add jobs to that queue. And then BullMQ has this super simple worker that we can create to process our jobs. So all it's going to do is, of course, a user is going to hit our API endpoint. It's going to create a job. It's going to go to this worker. The worker is going to look up the job and get the job by its, job state ID. I created a little sleep timeout here just to show that this can take a few seconds. We're going to update the job state to a finished status. We're going to save it. If you've worked with any kind of active record pattern, right, this is going to look very familiar to you. You're going to see this save. We're going to save it, and then we're just going to go ahead and make a post request back to our Nuxt application to say, hey, this job is done, right? So when I talk about cheap, HTTP is really cheap, right? That costs me nothing to hit it. And if you have all of your applications within the same cluster or within the same kind of architecture, if you're using Google Cloud or AWS, you may even be able to get rid of the HTTP and just hit your applications within the cluster itself, right? So this is very cheap. If you're using a larger scale application or you have more framework or you have more money, you might consider moving to something like PubSub. You could move to something that can handle a queue-based messaging system, and you don't have to rely on HTTP states. But we have some resilience here because even if this application sends the status and the app is down, when the user comes back, they're going to get those job states again. And so this worker will run, it'll process it, and then it sends it back to our Nuxt front end. Everything else is pretty much Redis or Postgres. And so we'll get this running here. And that's beautiful. And then what we can take a look at next is a module that I put together, and don't worry, I will plus this in a second. So let's get that. Is that gonna go? I don't want to mess with my files here in case anyone pulls this up later.
Just don't commit anything.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So.
Git diff is your friend.
Yeah, I can't zoom in anymore in this window. I'm not sure what's.
Does he have a prompt down there in the bottom right? It's blocking your UI?
I don't know. I feel like Cody right now. Like, just start tossing out ideas. If anyone's got something, I can't do this. Yeah, I don't know what's. Let's see. Let's close
Try
that.
view and zoom.
Yeah, let's see. Command. Let's go to view and then. Where's our appearance? And then where does it go? Zoom is command equals now, okay. Yeah, option, no. I would give anything for this to just work at this moment. So let's go back to the view and let's go to appearance and then let's just zoom in a whole bunch. And then just tell me when that's good. I'm gonna click this until it looks good to you guys. So zoom in again. Are we good?
One more.
Okay. Appearance and zoom in.
That's
That good?
in the back.
You guys good? Cool.
Just do one more.
One more? One more. One more. So let's go zoom in.
All this is available on GitHub, correct?
Yeah, it's all available on GitHub. What kind of developer would you be if you couldn't? So if we look at this module, right, so when I talked about the infrastructure, I want my backend service to have a entity that is defined, right? And if you are familiar with Rails or you've worked with any kind of, ORM, this should feel pretty familiar to you, right? So we have an entity or model, if you will. It is a job state. And basically all it does is it has an ID and it has a status, right? So in our backend, we would look up a job state by its ID, an updated status. For anyone else, you might have, you know, information that gets tied to this, an error message, a success message, some data that comes back. Here, all we need is just a queued, running, finished, or failed to abstract away the statuses, maybe from an API that the user doesn't need to see. We just need them to see this. And so here we have an entity that implements our interface here, which is the job state interface. It has an ID, which is a number. It has our statuses. And this is pretty succinct. And so we can take this into our Nuxt application now and move into our live statuses. And I will do this view rigmarole again. So let's do zoom in and appearance, zoom in, and yell out when you guys can see it. I don't know what you guys in the back are seeing, so let's do this.
One more.
One more? Okay, view.
Just listen to Whit. He's the oldest one back there.
Makes sense. So, so this application is a Nuxt app. If you haven't seen Nuxt applications, it's basically a front end with a Nitro server in the back end, right? So our Nitro service allowed us to create routes that responded to certain HTTP events, right? So we have a post route, we have a get route, and we have a job states post. And so for my Nitro service that's processing, I have this job states post that when a event finishes, when a job finishes, it reaches back out to my application, and we broadcast messages to the user and say, hey, all this is done. And so that runs through Nitro's, of course, WebSockets. And when I talked about this, I said that a Nitro config is a valid Nuxt config, and that stands true here. So Nitro has an experimental feature called WebSocket, and in Nuxt, we can access that because Nitro is just the underlying framework to the service. They say it's experimental. I've been using it in production for a little while. It's been nothing but stable for me, so take that for what you will, play around with it for a little bit. And then for my user-facing stuff, we of course need to create a job. So we make a post request to our Nitro service, and we say, hey, just go ahead and create a job, and we'll just return this response to the user and just let them know that the job has been created with a queued status. And then we need to be able to get the job states, right? So this is where the resilience kind of comes from, is that the user doesn't need the live updates from WebSockets. They can land back on the page and get the previous job states once the Nitro service comes back up or once our front end comes back up, right? So if we think about our Vercel example of all the deployments, I want to be able to see the deployment that's currently running, but I also need to be able to see past deployments to make sure that, hey, yes, this deployed correctly at this time, or we did have a run deploy at a certain time, so that way, if product comes to me and says, hey, there's an issue with our service, did we deploy on Friday last week? I can say, yeah, we deployed on Friday and we deployed on Monday, and we can start tracing down an issue that way. And so a real cool, I guess, I'm not sure if it's a feature that not a lot of people know about, is when you put together a module, and this is using unbuild from un.js, is we can build a module with npm, and so we will just build this real quick, and it is going to give us a dist directory, of course, with our index.mjs of all of our built JavaScript, very beautiful. We get our types exported, and then we get a couple I don't know, I guess, environment TypeScript files. And so if you're not familiar with these, a DTS file just means that these are types. You would see these as a TS file could be used. A DTS just means that you don't have to import it, but I mean, these are still valid TypeScript files. So if it looks a little weird to you, it's still just TypeScript. So locally now what I can do is npm link this package, and then I can go back to my other applications and npm link my job states, and this will install this module into my project, but it doesn't add it to my dependencies list, which is huge. So if you're someone who has to work with npm modules a lot, sometimes you just want to have a local version of it running where you're testing, but you don't want to overwrite what's in your dependencies because you don't want to accidentally commit your testing version to it. This is great. You can just link the module to your dependencies and it just handles it in the background. There is no need to add it to your actual dependency list. And so that's what I'm doing here. This isn't a published module that you guys could go download on npm later. And so that's actually a really helpful little tool in case anyone wasn't super familiar about that. And so I'll go ahead and close this service, and we'll go ahead and run this link again. and then perfect. So we'll start our service here, and then we will go ahead and start our front end, which has access to those tools through the shared module. And let's run dev there. And if everything worked, and if we remember the Safeway clicker, we should be able to get this, and perfect. It works. And so this is a really simple UI, but as I mentioned, being able to display a running process to a user is really important. So if I hit sync here, we get a queued, it's gonna sleep for 3 seconds, and finished. We just processed a background job and gave the user a live status, right? Our Nuxt app is using WebSockets through Nitro, broadcasting a message to all users. This is just a built-in feature, and they do allow you to scope these resources if that's something you want to look into. My Auth0 trial ran out just before this talk, so I removed Auth. But you can scope this. I want to leave this pretty general as a talk so you guys can go look up some of these resources and dive into it on your own. But that's pretty cool. But then a Rails developer will come to me and say, Aidan, you still haven't done it. Sidekick, that gives me a UI. What are you doing? I want to be able to watch my jobs run. And so to those people, I would like to throw out that 1, get down off your high horse, and then 2, we can actually take a look at what's going on in these processes if we look at a admin UI that I set up just before, and we run that, perfect. So we can see our jobs processing in something called Bullboard. And this is a really cool open source package that I've done my best to contribute to. This is how Nuxt got this feature, is to set it up with Nitro. It is a project that allows you to watch Bull queues inside your Node applications, right? So this is very important. If I'm a developer and the front end isn't updated, I want to be able to see, hey, did these jobs actually complete? What does Redis have? What does Postgres? What is my underlying job status, I guess host or wherever you save it? What is the actual status there? And so this is a really important service, and if I come and kick off another job here, we can watch this one go in, we get an active job, this goes through, it completes, and bam, right there, I just split out 2 Node applications into a service where now I can deploy my Nitro backend. My admins, my developers can go to this route and check out what's going on with their jobs, what's going on with their statuses, and then my front end here, there's no admin route I have to set up. There's no route rules I have to add. And you can say, Aidan, oh yeah, well, we'll just use auth to protect it. You know what's better than protecting routes? Just not having the route in your front end anyways. And I know that sounds a little silly, but when we have the ability to just throw our admin panels into the back, this is really powerful because now I can watch where they're being processed, on the app they're being processed on, and I can add authentication here, and then here I can kick off my syncs and job states. And of course, all this code is in GitHub. I'll pull back up the keynote here after I finish, but otherwise, this is kind of a finished application. And so thank you guys for letting me talk to you tonight, and thank you for letting me demo this. I hope I stayed under time here, but I wanted to leave some time for questions. So if anyone has anything to ask or say, hey, Aidan, I've been developing 20 years longer than you, you did something stupid, feel free to throw it out, or if you guys have anything that I didn't cover. No? Okay.
Any questions for Aidan?
Anything? Yeah, what's up?
It'd be trivial just to have like a case job spin, or like a Docker container just spin up and do that background processing off of your main process.
Right. So I mean, what you would be Dockerizing, right? I guess Dockerizing is the right term.
Yeah.
Is we have the processor application. And if you have a DevOps engineer who's never Dockerized a Node application, vet them a little harder. But I mean, Dockerizing a Node application, There's a ton of examples. I'm in Discord under my, regular Aidan Hibbard name. So if you're ever running into an issue, setting up your reverse proxy to your Node application, your Docker container, or something like that, reach out. I've done this 1,000 times. I'm more than happy to provide like a YAML spec or something for anyone who wants to do this. Was there a question over here? Yeah, what's up?
Yeah, is there any utility that can provide like API type safety, like an RPC?
API type safety.
Have you ever worked with like TRPC or?
Oh yeah, okay, sorry. I thought you said PC as in like PC. So Nuxt has Zod support if you've ever worked with that. So you can work with Zod and TRPC in the backend. So you'd set up a TRPC router, send that to Nuxt, and they actually have a full documentation guide on this. And that's actually something that I've looked into. So you would use TRPC, and then Nuxt, when you have a route that, let's say, in this instance, I guess, let's pull up the Nuxt application. I want to see if the TypeScript server will grab this. So if I have my live status app and I go to my page here that was displaying this, I have my request here. So I've just typed my request by passing it a type argument. But if I remove this and I go over to /API v1 create job, which is the endpoint that we have to hit, right here, it automatically, I don't know if you can see that because it's going to try to show this follow link here, but it automatically types the response, right? I don't have to pass a job argument here for it to show, oh, hey, for API v1 create job, this is a post, and then it already infers that, hey, this is a promise that returns a job with a ID that has a number, and it has a status queued, running, finished, or failed. And so this is a really great part of Nuxt that allows you to move fast, is I don't really have to type all of my fetch requests. I don't have to do any as or assertions here. It's already going to understand the types. And yes, if you use TRPC and add on Zod on top of that and a few other things, you're still going to get that type safety here because it's just going to return what the route is. Because if you look at a route here, all this is just a function that returns something. And so TypeScript can very easily understand what is being returned here. Oh, hey, this is returning a job state. Great, the response is a job state, and it's going to pass it to the front end. So to your question, yeah, you'll get type safety in the front end. Yeah, anything else? Yeah.
It's like the grow up story. Like you kind of mentioned a little bit about like queues and different cloud services you might use, like in your architecture here. Like, is there a point where like this doesn't scale, or like you're going to run into different things that you're like, okay, I want to actually go to like a messaging queues and then kick off different processes that way, like in this, or is it something that you would tack on top of it?
I would honestly, I don't remember your name, I'm so sorry. I would Dockerize the Nitro service, and then I would just spread it out in pods, right? So let's say I have my Nitro service, it has a worker. If I'm using Kubernetes, I can have 4 pods of that same Nitro server. That gives me, X amount of workers, and they're all processing out of the same queue. So to this point, this could scale you to, further than your ChatGPT service is going to take you. But if you need to move to something like queues in Google Cloud or AWS, that's where serverless is going to come in. And so if you have a serverless application like I talked about earlier, your app is only going to be alive when that request is being made, right? So you invoke the function runs, it returns some kind of response, and then it closes. So you can't use that for background processing because once the app closes, you're not going to process anything anymore. And that's where I see more of those, I guess, dedicated queue processors coming in. I know Vercel has one and a few others. But no, to that point, Rails with Sidekick, Laravel with their queue-based system, that's meant to scale to whatever you need it to. And to that point, you could do this here. You would just create more instances of the same server. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, yeah. I guess you wouldn't need to move this into a cloud-based messaging or queue system because you would just increase the power of the application. And that's what's nice about moving this to a dedicated resource is I can say, oh, I want 4 instances of this Nitro server running to handle whatever workload and then scale it back down once I'm done. So it should be pretty succinct. Anything else? Toss at me? Go for it.
Well, first off, what cruel Rails developers do you keep running into? Why are they the same ones that I'm running into? No, just that's joking aside. Do you have any good tests written for this? Because I'd love to see what, like, not just unit, but acceptance tests look like.
Yeah,
And
so
since you're sharing types between front end and server, I bet acceptance testing looks really slick.
yeah, so to your point, where I would introduce tests is I can test in the module, I can test in Nitro, and then I can test in Nuxt. And so Nitro is actually coming out with a revamped test utils library, which is why I didn't write unit tests for this. I also didn't have time. And so if we talk about unit testing with this on Nuxt, we would write end-to-end tests, right? To click the button, run the response, and Nuxt does have test utils to mock those responses, right? I mean, any testing library should be able to intercept, and that's where like knock.js or something else would come into this. But yes, you could absolutely unit test this, and the beautiful thing about this architecture is that my entities for my ORM on the Nitro service come from my module. So I don't need to test these entities in my application. I can test them in my module, something like vtest or jest or Mocha, whatever you're using, and then in my applications, I only have to test that this event handler responds or accepts the request that I need. So yeah, you could integration test, you could write end-to-end tests for this entire suite, you could unit test it, and it would be much easier to do than slamming everything into a single Nuxt application, and then you have a test suite that's 1,000 files, a million different shared, testing, I guess, examples, and it becomes kind of a nightmare. So does that answer your question? Yes, you could write unit tests.
Oh, yes, that more than answers.
Okay, cool. Anything else?
What tracing libraries or diagnostics APIs are you using for your node processes that you're surfacing information?
So like diagnostics as in like uptime robot, that kind of thing?
Yeah, like I couldn't really see what you were reporting to the UI.
Oh, okay, so here in the UI that we use, so this is called Bold Board. And this is a util put together by a really nice guy named Felix, I can't remember his name, Felix Mosh, I guess. I don't know if that's actually his last name, but super nice guy. He maintains this library. And so Bold Board is what I would use if I was like an admin within my company. This is where I'd go check it out, or if I was a developer. But to that same point for reporting and error handling, BullMQ does have like Puma metrics, or that you can report to Datadog or something else. And I guess at that point, that's kind of more up to your integration and how you build your service than anything else. In your Docker container, you could have stuff monitoring the health of your application. And I would say if you're just watching your queues, that doesn't really go far enough, right? So DevOps engineers that I've worked with, they want to make sure that the server responds using Uptime Robot. They want to check database health, they're checking Redis health, and then they're exporting the metrics from BullMQ here to some other service, whether that's Datadog, Puma, something else. So to your point, I guess that's more on your architecture where you're reporting that to. But if you do have any questions about different services, reach out and I can get you in touch with somebody. Yeah.
Have you ever ran into like any foot guns per se? Like, I know coming from people that were using Rails a lot, we got sucked into factory, and then it just seemed like we were running across all these foot guns because we weren't, we're like, oh, now we need SOD. We need to actually validate the shape of everything coming across the line. Then somebody's like, oh, we need some redundancy. So now we have two like servers up and going, but now we had double jobs processing and gridlocked, and it was just a nightmare. And I don't know, like, have you ran into any foot guns, or has it just been smooth sailing?
I would say it's smooth sailing, but I would attribute that to developers who are smarter than I. Right, so to your point where you have two jobs processing at once, that's more to how you set up your infrastructure, right? So if I'm using Kubernetes, I have multiple pods that are running, this Nitro service in the background, and they're processing jobs, and I have 4 instances of it running. That's kind of how you set up your Redis, how you handle locks, how you handle threads, and then to that point, how are your applications sharing resources? I haven't ran into anything like that. If you go to the BullMQ guides or their website, they are used by some larger organizations like Microsoft and others at scale. And so they have really good documentation about running concurrency, how do you scale across multiple workers, multiple instances. So again, to your point, that's kind of more to your infrastructure, not something that I could necessarily speak to right here. But if you do run into something, ping me on Discord and I'm more than happy to help out. Cool. I feel like I talked for a while, so.
Anybody else?
All right, thanks, Aidan. That was great.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna wrap up at about like 8:30-ish, and then go down to River Pig. But before y'all take off, if you could bring all your dishes, all your cans, and bring them over to the kitchen area, we'll take care of them. So, all right, well, thanks everybody for coming out, and y'all have a great night. We're gonna hang around, just kind of network for a little bit, but yeah, thanks for all for coming out.
Damn, things have moved a lot since I was working in this industry.
That was really interesting.
Yeah. Something too.
And I learned Ruby, so all kind of
Yeah.
familiar. Like, your format is very similar.
Yeah. All these structures. You see them repeatedly in all these different frameworks. But yeah.
And he'll just fix it.
I don't know. I'm happy to go just teach low-level foundation stuff that doesn't move anymore.
I just
Yeah, I just have to take all like applications. Like right now I'm using ExpressJS, but I still use Express. But someday I'll be right in the chat.
you know, you need
Everything still has its place.
Also, as I get older, I feel like I just noticing how grumpy I was. It was GitHub. They sent me a newsletter about something. It was like they called it the agenda. The agentic era has begun. They said. And then it said something about right side.